This young girl, when she was just 3 years old, survived horrific events. She experienced a terrible nightmare that no one should ever endure. This is Carmina Salcido, and she survived after her father, Ramon Bojorquez Salcido, slashed her and her two sisters' throats and left them to die at a dump. This terrible story shocked all of America, and to this day, many people shudder at the memory of the day when the police found Carmina and the bodies of her two sisters. This is the story of a true psychopath who spent his life harboring anger and aggression, which all burst out in one horrific moment. Ramon Salcido was born on March 6, 1961, in Los Mochis, a city in the northwestern part of Mexico, located in the state of Sinaloa. He was the eldest child of Valentina Salcido and Arnoldo Salcido Valle, who would go on to have 3 more boys and 2 girls. The family was large, but unfortunately, they didn't have the means to live in a spacious house. They lived in a simple home with only 2 bedrooms. Arnoldo, the father, worked as a driver and maintenance supervisor at a sugarcane processing plant known as Ingenio. This job provided the family with a certain level of economic security. They lived modestly, but their basic needs were met. Unfortunately, in 1975, at the age of 37, Arnoldo passed away due to ongoing heart problems. Valentina was left to care for 6 children, the house and the household on her own. She faced many difficulties but managed to ensure that all her children were fed and clothed. Ramon, who was already 16, decided to help his mother by getting a job first at a repair shop and then as a driver for a beer store. The teenager performed so well at his jobs that his bosses couldn't help but notice and appreciate his efforts. He was often paid more for his hard work. Around 1980, at the age of 18, Ramon met a girl who was pregnant by another man. Got married just a few months after meeting. However, their union didn't last long. Shortly after giving birth, the woman left Ramon for the father of her child. Her departure left a deep wound in the young man's soul. So much so that he decided to completely change his life, and even his country. He emigrated to the United States, believing he could earn more money and experience unforgettable emotions there. Once in the States, Ramon settled in Kern County, California, living as an undocumented immigrant and therefore working tough, low-paying jobs. Initially, he picked grapes in the Sonoma Valley, and then worked as a stable hand. The prospects weren't great, but it seemed to satisfy the young man. Gradually settling into his new place of residence, Ramon began to make friends and meet girls. His next love interest turned out to be 27-year-old Deborah Witham. Their romance was very intense, so much so that within a year, in August 1984, the couple had a daughter, Maria Crystal, and decided to get married. But once again, Ramon's marriage was doomed, ending as quickly as it began. The reasons for their separation remain unknown. Ramon moved away without divorcing Deborah, leaving behind a child he would subsequently never support. Ramon wasn't alone for long. Just a few months later, at a community dance after a football game, he met a blonde beauty, 19-year-old Angela Elaine Richards, the daughter of Marion Louise and Robert Richards. Angela's family was respectable, with parents who invested a lot in raising their children. For instance, Angela's younger sisters, Ruth and Mary, were homeschooled because their mother was concerned that schools didn't provide enough education and that some students used drugs, which was unacceptable to Marion. Throughout her life, Angela had never introduced her boyfriends to her parents until her path crossed with Ramon's. Soon, she was sneaking out at night just to see her beloved. He courted her beautifully, unlike anyone else. He gave her books with horse illustrations so she could practice drawing, brought her flowers, and took care of her. Angela was also drawn to his rugged Mexican appearance. To her, he looked like a cowboy from her fantasies, an idyllic romance. But on the surface, they seemed like a romantic couple from a story, while in reality, they were deceiving each other. For example, Ramon never told her about his second wife, Deborah, and their daughter, Maria Crystal. Angela, on her part, initially hid her pregnancy by another man. It's still unknown whether she became pregnant while in a relationship with Ramon or before. In any case, the young man found out about her pregnancy, but she never told him that the child wasn't his. On December 8, 1984, the couple married, despite Angela's parents' negative opinions. To Marian, Ramon was just a simple Mexican without a bright future, but she still gave her blessing for the marriage since her daughter was about to give birth and was without a husband. 4 months later, Sophia was born. Now, being married to a U.S. citizen, Ramon could apply for legal residency in the country. Angela, of course, helped him with this, and after some time, Ramon received his green card. Subsequently, 2 more children were born in the marriage, Carmina and Teresa. Supporting such a large family was difficult, so the couple resorted to fraud. From December 1985 to March 1986, they fraudulently received social benefits for their daughters. That same year, fortune knocked on their door. Ramon managed to get a job at the Grand Cru Vineyard in Sonoma, where the pay was very good. At first, Ramon was friendly, sociable, well-dressed, punctual, and never missed work. He also became friends with his colleague, David Holman. However, this man had a bad influence on Ramon. Soon they started going to bars together, drinking heavily and using cocaine. This habit became so frequent that the amount consumed grew exponentially. According to specialized data on drug addiction, a lethal dose of cocaine is between 0.5 gram to 1.5 grams. Ramon and David consumed about 0.5 gram every 6 weeks. At that time, the family lived in a small rented one-bedroom house about 11 kilometers from the winery where Ramon worked. Across the street, at house number 8393, lived Angela's family in a rented house. This situation, along with Angela's independence, did not align with Ramon's views. To him, his wife's family should have lived far away from them, and his wife should have been doing household chores and obeying him in everything, not being independent. Ramon also disappointed Angela. She had imagined her husband to be different, but he treated her very poorly. Typically, he spent 4 to 5 evenings a week at bars until 11 p.m. Around that time, a fraud involving the couple and social services came to light. The authorities dropped the charges against Ramon, who denied everything. However, Angela confessed and was fined $170. Ramon, as the family breadwinner, felt he should handle the financial issues alone. He was very dissatisfied with Angela working and even with her mother helping the family. Marian often sewed clothes for her granddaughters and even for her sons-in-law. She also sold some of the sewn items and gave the money to her daughter as assistance. This deeply bothered Ramon. He then devised a plan to sell stolen wine and cocaine to pay off their debts. He went around to bars, offering wine. One of these places was the McNally's Tavern in the neighboring town of El Summer, where Ramon had a great reputation. All the employees considered him a gentleman, a workaholic trying to provide for his family. However, the owners of a Mexican restaurant on the other side of town had a very different opinion. They saw Ramon walking around with beer and often trying to leave the bar without paying. They considered him a real swindler. By then, there were some changes at the vineyard. A new employee, Kenneth Booth, was hired for a supervisory position. He noticed that Ramon was not performing his duties well and reported this to their boss, Tressa Tuve. Tressa, in turn, told Ramon that he needed to improve his performance, but Ramon did not acknowledge his mistakes and claimed that Kenneth was simply biased against Mexican workers. In 1987, during the Christmas holidays, Ramon, Angela, and their 3 daughters visited family in Mexico. Despite Angela not speaking Spanish, her beauty, friendliness, and openness allowed everyone to have a wonderful time. This experience was so pleasant that Valentina felt proud of the family her son had created, especially when he told her about the warm relationships he had with Angela's family. However, Valentina did not know that her son was not only a liar, but also heavily addicted to drugs. The following year, Ramon started using more cocaine. Consequently, he appeared at home less and less frequently, and later each time. Angela grew lonely and decided to find a job that she would enjoy. She was drawn to modeling. This turn of events caused extreme jealousy in Ramon, so much so that he eventually began to think that his wife was cheating on him with his boss, Tracy Tuve. This thought led to another. He began to doubt that he was the biological father of their eldest daughter, Sophia. These worries affected Ramon's work. He was on the verge of being fired. His marriage was falling apart, and relationships were deteriorating. Neighbors frequently heard fights and screams coming from the Salcido household. One neighbor reported that Ramon was beating Angela. Another said they heard him threaten to shoot her, and all this happened in front of their innocent children. "I remember the fights between him and my mom, and he just kept hitting and hitting her," Sophia recalled. On Tuesday, April 11, 1989, Ramon received papers from Deborah, his second wife, who decided to take him to court for child support for their daughter, Maria Crystal. Somehow, Angela found out about this, which led to a major argument between them. Angela had previously considered divorce, but after this news, she firmly decided to leave Ramon. The next day, Angela talked to one of her neighbors, a woman named Connie Brazil, and mentioned the divorce. On the evening of Thursday, April 13, 1989, Connie noticed Ramon loading boxes of wine into the trunk of his car. After that, he left. In the evening, his acquaintance Mark Oxer met him at McNally's Tavern. Ramon sold him 2 boxes of sparkling wine. At around 11:30 p.m., they both headed to Ramon's car to take cocaine. In the bar, Ramon tried to get more drugs. He then invited Mark to the Sonoma Mission Inn to spend time with some women. There, he took even more illicit substances. Around 2:50 a.m., Layla Brooks, the hotel receptionist, spoke with him. Ramon spoke very quietly and struggled to communicate in English. However, she noted that he didn't appear to be drunk or under the influence of drugs. He seemed quite coherent. Unable to find a reservation under his name, Ramon continued to the Uralese with his friend Mark. By the early morning of Friday, April 14, 1989, while still high and clearly unable to think logically, Ramon decided to reflect on his financial and family problems. He thought of what he considered a brilliant solution. He returned home to find that Angela had left, leaving the children with him. At that moment, Ramon felt the urge to kill her. For courage, he took more cocaine and around 5 a.m., put Sophia, Carmina, and Teresa in the car and drove away. At 5:39 a.m., Angela withdrew $200 in cash from their joint account. Ramon knew about this and became even angrier. He even considered ending his life. But instead, another idea crossed his deranged mind, and he acted on it. He took his daughters to the Stiga Gulch dump, pulled out a knife, and slit the throats of all 3. Believing the girls to be dead, he got back into his car and drove to his mother-in-law's house. It is unknown how he confirmed that his daughters were dead, but evidently not reliably, as 3-year-old Carmina was still alive. The knife blade had missed her carotid artery, and the girl simply lost consciousness. That morning, Robert, Angela's father, left for work before 7 a.m. He didn't plan to return home that evening and intended to go straight to New York after work. Thus, when Ramon arrived at his mother-in-law's house, he found Marian and her daughters, Ruth and Marianne, alone. With the same knife he had used on his daughters, he killed all 3 women. Then Ramon went to the room where Robert's firearms collection was stored and took a .22 caliber automatic pistol and ammunition. Around the same time, neighbor Roy Curtis saw the Chihuahua of the Richards family barking, trembling, and looking towards the house. Roy had never seen the dog loose before and decided to knock on the Richards' front door. Naturally, no one answered. He then heard a man's voice, probably coming from a radio or television, and decided not to bother the family further, so he left. Ramon then returned to his home. Angela was next. He shot her as soon as she arrived home. His anger was still not quenched, and the deaths were not enough for him. So he went to work. where on the way to the winery, he encountered his boss Tracy and shot him. Acting completely cold-bloodedly and calmly, he went to Kenneth's house and, finding him in the yard, fired several shots at him. Kenneth fell to the ground, but he was lucky. The bullet only hit his shoulder. His wife was less fortunate. She was standing at the door when she noticed the gun aimed at her. She didn't have time to react before the shots rang out. Around this time, a call came into the police station about a shooting at 201 Bryan Street, where Ramon's house was located. Responding to the call, the officers hoped the shooter was still on the scene, possibly hiding. But within minutes, they only found Angela's body. In the kitchen and hallway, they found 6 bullet casings, an ATM receipt, a child care notice, and $200 in cash. Angela had received a total of 3 wounds, 2 to the head and 1 to the shoulder. It appeared that the attacker shot at point-blank range because her head was in a horrific condition. That Friday, after committing the murders, Ramon called his mother, Valentina. She immediately sensed something was wrong with her son. He was usually in a good mood, but this time he was crying, saying he needed to say goodbye because he was going to be killed. Then he hung up the phone and disappeared. First, Ramon withdrew cash from his account and bought a shirt and a pair of pants at the San Rafael department store. He then vanished, leaving his car at the fort on the store's parking lot. By that time, Detective Mike continued to receive calls about new victims. This time, he was informed about shootings at the Vineyard and Kenneth's house. Finding Kenneth alive but with a gunshot wound to the shoulder, the police asked him about the attacker. Later that same day, officers found Ramon's car, a bag, and a credit card receipt. Under the front passenger seat was a .22 caliber pistol with ammunition and a knife with a small amount of blood on it. Nearby lay children's clothing, also soaked in blood. At noon on Saturday, April 15, 1989, the bodies of Sophia and Teresa were discovered by 2 quarry workers. Nearby, the small and defenseless Carmina was sitting. She was terrified and on the brink of death. The girl was urgently taken to the emergency room of Petaluma Valley Hospital, where a team of 20 medical professionals treated her. When she was being transferred from one bed to another, she said in her tiny child's voice that her father had cut her. It is hard to imagine that one person could do such a thing to another, especially to his own children. Detective Mike was absolutely shocked by the case. In my entire career, I have participated in more than 100 murder investigations, but I have never seen such a level of cruelty. And it amazed me, he said. Only when relatives started calling, encouraged by news from Mexico, did Valentina realize that her son was the very person wanted for the bloody massacre. It was a complete shock. Until that day, she always believed her son was leading an exemplary life as an immigrant, adapting well to the customs of the new country. She was not the only one who found it hard to believe this horror. None of his acquaintances in Mexico could imagine that the sociable and friendly guy they knew and loved had turned into the person California authorities called a brutal murderer. Mexican authorities checked Ramon's criminal record. Their biggest fear was that he might try to hide in their country. Terrified, Deborah, who was aware of the bloody massacre, was under police protection as they feared Ramon might visit his ex-wife. Fortunately, this did not happen. The search for the criminal was conducted nationwide. The case became so widespread that some people were calling everyone with the same last name as Ramon and threatening them. Famous cartoonist Charles Schulz even provided his private plane to the FBI for the search for the criminal. Meanwhile, subsequent genetic tests confirmed that Sophia was not Ramon's biological daughter. As for Ramon himself, he managed to enter Mexico through the border crossing in Calexico, California. On Thursday, April 20, 1989, just hours before dawn, Drug Enforcement Administration agents conducted an unscheduled check on the outskirts of Huasaiba, a village near Los Mochis. During the operation, they encountered Ramon, who was immediately arrested and taken into custody in Mexico City. That same day, a memorial service was held in the United States in honor of the victims of Ramon's uncontrollable rage. Ramon was extradited to the United States and confessed to the murders to Detective David. The trial took place in 1990. Due to media frenzy and to ensure court security, it was decided to hold the trial outside of Sonoma. Ramon's lawyer, Martin Miller, tried to defend him, claiming that the accused lost his sanity due to the substances he consumed the night before. He stated that the combination of alcohol and cocaine led to a complete loss of control over his emotions and thoughts. Psychiatrist and clinical researcher Dr. Izzy Jones, an expert in psychopharmacology, explained the effects of alcohol and cocaine use. According to him, cocaine users are not in a state of intoxication and do not show impaired motor skills, whereas alcohol has the opposite effect. Alcohol and cocaine affect the user in opposite ways and generally prompt the user to exhibit pre-existing aggression. In other words, on that day, the man only showed what had always been inside him. Dr. Jones also reviewed police and toxicology reports and listened to recordings of Ramon's confession. According to the doctor, the type of weapon chosen and the efficiency with which the wounds were inflicted typically indicated premeditated murder. Similarly, Ramon's ability to move from one crime scene to another reflected his judgment, attention, focus, and planning. All of this contradicted the mental disorder that could have resulted from intense drug use, which the defense wanted to use as an argument. After a lengthy trial on October 30th, 1990, the jury found Ramon guilty on 6 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. 2 weeks later, on November 16, 1990, Ramon Ballorca Salcido was sentenced to death by the jury. But the story did not end there. You are probably wondering what happened to the surviving girl. Unfortunately, having no relatives who could take care of her, Carmina was adopted by a Catholic family in Missouri who tried to erase her past, even giving her a new name. Because of this, Carmina was restricted in her movements and interactions. At the age of 15, she discovered a hidden box with newspaper clippings containing horrible stories from her past life. When she demanded explanations from her adoptive parents, they told her that her past was a forbidden path that would lead her straight to hell. They also told her that she was no better than her father and that demon blood ran through her veins. Unable to endure such treatment, she ran away from home at 17 and joined a convent in Nebraska, becoming a cloistered nun. After less than a year, she left the convent and found a new home at a ranch for troubled teens in Idaho. Eventually, Carmina felt the need to return to Sonoma County. Although she did not remember her past life, she wanted to reconnect with her roots and write a book about her life. Additionally, she was drawn to the idea of seeing her father again. Hoping to move forward, she arranged a meeting with Ramon at San Quentin Prison in February 2006. Like many inmates on death row, Ramon claimed to have undergone an amazing religious conversion. After taking seminary courses, he became a minister to other inmates and called himself Reverend. The visit was extremely unpleasant for Carmina because Ramon, far from showing any remorse, greeted her with a smile, a gesture almost mocking, as she later recounted in her book. She later stated that she hoped she would never have to see this man again. As of 2024, Ramon Salcido remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison in California. California has not carried out an execution since 2006.